Patriotism, The Rite of Love and Death by Yukio Mishima. A review by Louis Hillenbrand. Yukio Mishima was the pseudonym used by author, bodybuilder, actor, model, and nationalist activist Kimitake Hiraoka, who lived between 1925 and 1970. During his 45 years of existence, Mishima was a figure that defied both conventions and definitions, discussing taboo issues of his time such as homosexuality, but also pursuing the cult of the heroic body and mentality. These themes were to be found throughout the entirety of his literary works, from his second novel Confessions of a Mask to his final tetralogy The Sea of Fertility, completed the very year of his death. They were also immortalized for the screen in his only short film Patriotism, a prophetic work that not only predicted the manner of Mishima's death, but also summarizes what he stood for his entire life. Yukio Mishima was born in the district of Tokyo, in a family with noble roots on his mother's side. It was in fact his maternal grandmother who took in the boy for the first years of his life, subjecting him to a particularly severe existence inspired by her aristocratic ways. He was forbidden to see boys his age, and mostly spent time in solitude reading or playing with his female cousins and their dolls. At age 12, he was taken back to his parents. It was at that time that he began writing his first stories, which were quickly destroyed by his bureaucratic father, who nevertheless had strict military tendencies, and forced Mishima to undergo extreme experiences such as standing near speeding trains, the polar opposite of the life he had led at his grandmother's. In spite of this total change of pace, he continued reading and writing in secret, protected by his mother, even when his father frequently ransacked Mishima's room for signs of literary productions or interests. During his schooling, Mishima developed a keen interest in both classical Japanese poetry and literature, but also European classics. He studied French, German, and English, and is known to have cited authors from countries where those languages are spoken as inspiration, such as Georges Bataille, Rainer Maria Rilke, and Oscar Wilde. His school was very impressed by his writing and published a certain number of his stories in prestigious literary magazines. During the Second World War, he was expected to enlist in the Imperial Japanese Army, but on the day of his medical examination, he had a cold that was misdiagnosed by his doctor as tuberculosis. Different sources vary as to whether it was a deliberate attempt not to be enlisted or whether the blame is to be put on the wrong diagnosis. In either case, what is for sure is that the impossibility to serve in his nation's military forces haunted him for the rest of his days, and that the defeat of Japan and the abdication of the emperor in 1945 traumatized him, and he wrote extensively about it in the following years. After the war, he published his first novels, the most famous of which being 1949's Confessions of a Mask, a semi-autobiographical coming-of-age novel discussing homosexuality. This subject that was considered taboo back then made it so that interest in Mishima quickly grew. During the 1950s, he wrote more erotic and romantic fiction such as The Sound of Waves and Forbidden Colors, and plays like The Lady of Aoi. In 1955, he picked up weight training with a schedule of 3 sessions per week that he never broke once for the rest of his life. In 1960, he starred in his first movie titled Afraid to Die, in which he sang for the main title song. It was also during that decade that his writing became more and more drastic and politically engaged, talking about the effects of the war on him, the importance of a heroic body and conduct, and even criticizing the emperor himself for renouncing his divine title and abdicating at the end of the war, which drew hostility towards him from both the political left and right of Japan of the time. In 1961, he published his short story Yukoku, which is usually translated as Patriotism, but according to the original Japanese, renders more the idea of concern for one's country. This story formed the basis of Mishima's own cinematic interpretation of his story in 1965, his short film, Patriotism, The Rite of Love and Death. In this short film that Mishima directed, produced, wrote, and starred in, we find a simple story set in the historical February 1936 incident. This rebellion in Japan involved a radical faction of the Imperial Japanese Army composed of young zealous officers that attempted a coup to purge the Japanese government of its more moderate components in order to install a totalitarian military regime. The insurrection was eventually crushed by the Imperial Japanese Army under the command of the Emperor. In the short film, we find Lieutenant Shinji Takeyama of the Imperial Army, who is ordered to execute some of his friends who were part of the rebellious factions in order to remain loyal to the Emperor. Unable to bear the thought of having to murder close friends to remain loyal to his divine monarch, Lieutenant Takeyama comes home to inform his wife Reiko that he will commit harakiri, the traditional ritual suicide to save one's honor. In her love for her husband, Reiko accepts to follow him in death. After their agreement, the husband and wife give in to their final desire and make passionate love one last time before the fated hour. That is when the lieutenant undergoes the procedure to cut his abdomen open and end his days, followed by his wife Reiko. The film ends with the two lovers laying together in death, their honor and their love saved. Mishima's Patriotism, the Rite of Love and Death, is remarkable in many aspects. It was Mishima's intention to appeal to international audiences with this short film, as opposed to reserve it to a Japanese audience only. First, he himself wrote the credit scrolls describing the silent film's general settings and actions in Japanese, English, and French. Second, he also insisted that be used two aspects of Japanese culture that could be recognizable to European audiences, namely the minimalist no-stage setting and the Zen garden at the very end. Third, for the score, he used a 1936 recording of symphonic syntheses by Leopold Stokowski based on Richard Wagner's Tristan und Isolde. This choice is particularly fitting not only because the recording dates back to the very year during which the story takes place, but it also complements the thematic depth of the story perfectly. Richard Wagner's Tristan und Isolde is a groundbreaking opera that premiered in 1865, 100 years before Mishima made his film and showed it to select audiences. It is a symbolic opera in that the lovers of the story cannot see a reconciliation between the day in which they cannot love each other that represents suffering, deceit, and pessimism, and night, which embodies solace and love. The only way they can love each other fully is through an eternal night of love and death, which is their ultimate fate at the end of the opera. Such reference to an earlier work with very similar themes, even if only musical, and even if I personally find Aaron Embry's recent rescore of the film to be a tad more fitting from a cinematographic point of view, in spite of Wagner being my favorite composer no less, clearly enhances the themes of the short film. Not only that, but it pushes them even further by taking a more erotic approach. It also mirrors Freudian explorations of the subconscious mind, and how its fascination for both love and death is said to be a deeply rooted desire for self-annihilation and a return to the blissful and warm oblivion of the motherly womb. What is interesting, however, is that, unlike in Wagner's Tristan und Isolde or Sigmund Freud's interpretations of the subconscious mind, this line between eroticism and death in Mishima's story does not express a desire for self-destruction that is caused by despair, but rather one that is in complete alignment with the characters' wills. Even if we see glimpses of a certain regret in the eyes of the lovers in the midst of their abandonment to love, they still go on with their project without any second thought. Both their final love and their ritual suicide is in abandonment to their desire for each other and for fidelity to what they believe to be true. Even though suicide is a very sensitive subject in the West because of the way Christian doctrines and Christian-inspired modern-day secular doctrines depict it, we must still see this short film as a respectable and honorable depiction of an ancestral tradition in Japan above all, one that is charged with meaning. The Rite of Love and Death also shows Mishima's admiration for the human body in its healthiest and most heroic form, with beauty and sacrifice always walking hand in hand. In his 1968 essay titled Sun and Steel, he laments how intellectuals always value the mind over the body, and instead promotes a cultivation of the body to contribute to one's heroic quality. This heroic quality is not one that seeks originality and fame, but rather wishes to be one with the body of one's community. It is a cultivation of the self that encourages one to follow earlier examples of heroism to inspire one in one's pursuit towards self-realization in the context of one's community. In 2 key passages he writes, "If the concept of the hero is a physical one, then, just as Alexander the Great acquired heroic stature by modeling himself on Achilles, the conditions necessary for becoming a hero must be both a ban on originality and true faithfulness to a classical model." He later writes, "At the moment when I realized that the use of strength and the ensuing fatigue, the sweat and the blood, could reveal that sacred ever-swaying blue sky that the shrine-bearers gazed on together, and could confer the glorious sense of being the same as others, I already had a foresight, perhaps, of that yet distant day when I should step beyond the realm of individuality into which I had been driven by words and awaken to the meaning of the group." In conclusion, Yukio Mishima's Patriotism, the Rite of Love and Death not only summarizes Mishima's interest for eroticism and his worship of a heroic body and conduct, but it also prophesizes Mishima's own death in 1970, when he attempted his own coup with a paramilitary group of students called the Tatenokai, or Shield Society, in order to attempt and restore traditional values to Japan and free it from Western influence, after which he and one of his associates committed seppuku, a series of events that were impressively rendered in Koji Watamatsu's 2012 movie, November 25, the day Mishima chose his own fate. He was an author that had an eventful life that defies characterization or any ideology. His pursuit of physical strength has definitely inspired me to perfect my own body, and from February 12, 2018 to May 12, 2019, I lost 50 pounds. I am obviously only at the beginning of this journey, and plan on perfecting my body and self even more in that heroic quest of striving ever forward towards one's realization and finding one's place in one's community and the great all, instead of trying to separate oneself from it, thus achieving genuine bliss of existence, a quest inspired by the truly exemplary man that was Yukio Mishima. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, please feel free to comment below to tell me your thoughts, give this video a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel for more content of the like. I wish you all a wonderful day and hope to hear from you soon.